lines down. First word in the line is, what's first word in the line? Adam? Adam. First word in the line is Adam. Umi mai. How do you know the chalala asara bar mischacha? How do you know that the chalala, that the airspace under halal means an airspace? I know the airspace under the schach is 10 tefachim bar, except for the schach. Ema, perhaps, behade schacha, maybe including the schach, it's 10 tefachim, meaning, and the interior is going to be less than 10 tefachim. Says the Gemara, Ella, you're right. Noob shots. We just went to daf proving the kapayras was a tefach. Says the Gemara, Naya Mekar, Rabbi Yehuda Erev Tov. Ella mi beis elamim gamar. We learn it from the Beis HaMikdash. We're smack in the middle of Ham and Beis. First word on the line is mi beis. We learn out from the Beis HaMikdash Dechsev. V'abayis HaShabbat HaMelech Shleima. And the house that Shleima HaMelech built Hashem was Shishim Amar, 160 amos long. V'esrim Rachvai, 20 amos wide. Ushleishim Amar Kamasai, 30 amos tall. Okay? Beis HaMikdash, 30 amos tall. Uksev, and the Pasuk says, the height of the krov was 10 amos. The relationship of 10 amos to 30 amos. If the ceiling was 30 amos, top of the krov is 10 amos, very good, is a third. Now there's a brisa. So the brisa, I'm sorry, good, thank you, Shlayach. Vitanya, and the brisa now says this ratio of 1 to 3, 10 amos to 30 amos, that ratio. I love him. Just like we find by the Beis HaMikdash, Kruvim b'shleish ha'abayis ein. Just like we find that the Kruvim were a third of the Beis HaMikdash, Mishkan Nami, in the Mishkan as well, Kruvim b'shleish ha'abayis ein. Okay, so if in the Mishkan the Kruvim were a third, now what do we got to figure out? How tall was the Mishkan? Says the Gemara, Mishkan Kamehave. What is the height of the Mishkan? Eser Amois. Tichsev, Eser Amos Ayurchai Keresh. Which, by the way, yes, Moshe Rabbeinu was 10 amos tall, and the Mishkan was 10 amos tall. Which calls to mind the Medrash that said Moshe Rabbeinu had difficulty picking up the Mishkan. What was so difficult? You usually pick up something your height. Yeah, good kasha. Says the Gemara, Kamehave, Lu. How many tfachim is in 10 amos? Shitin pushchi. 60 tfachim, as every amos 6 tfachim. So if the height of the Mishkan is 60 tfachim, how tall is the top of the keruvim? A third of 60. Till say, Kamehave, a third is how much? Esrim pushchi. So the kruvim are the top of the kruvim, and that's what we're proving over here. Because our whole kasha was what? How do we know that it's underneath the kruvim? Maybe the top is included. Says the Gemara, Esrim pushchi dal. Subtract asara 10 tvachim da'aron v'kapoires. Pashilu, how much is the space from under the top of the kruvim to the top of the aroin? Pashilu asara uksev ahayu akruvim. Now this is the punchline. The kruvim were parse kinafayim. Their wings were spread out. Limalon. What's the next word? Soichechin, like schach. They were covered over big kanfeim with their wings. Ala kapayres. So what do we see, says the Gemara? And now we have a Gevaldik Raya that the interior of your sukkah has to be 10 tvach. Says the Gemara, Mimai, what's your Raya? How do you know the wings where aluye were above their head. Maybe they were equal to their head. Yaakov. Limala ksiv. The pasuk says limala. Frak the Gemara, if it says that the wings were above, ve'ema dimidli tu, but maybe it was very far above. Miksiv limala, period. And that's another mekar that the Kruvim proved to us, because it says soichechen. The Kruvim proved to us that the minimum height of your sukkah is 10 tfachim of interior airspace. So after a full blot and a little bit, in which everything began from one detail, that an amma is 6 tfachim. And that's how we know that the aroin is amma v'chetzi, 6 and 3, 9 tfachim. Asks the Gemara, this is all. Ha nichal Rabbi Meir. This only works for Rabbi Meir Da'amar. Rabbi Meir is the opinion that says, Kol ha'amois hayu beinoini yois. Elo the Rabbi Yehuda Da'amar Amma shel binyan. The Amma of the building was Shisha Tvach. But says Rabbi Yehuda shel Kalim. The Kalim, which of course is the Arain, was what? Chamisha. So how tall was your Arain? 1.5 of 5 is 7.5. Plus one of the Kapairis is 8.5. The Kruvim were still at a height of 20. 20 minus 8.5 is 11.5. Says the Gemara, Michael and Meimar. Let's do the math together. Oh, right, the Kapairis Kamahablu, like we just said. Timnayo Palga. 8.5. Bashlu Chadsrei Palga. You're left with 11.5. So ask the Gemara, Ema Sukkah. Adahave Chadsrei Palga. Maybe a sukkah has to be 11.5. Says the Gemara, Gevaldik Teret. We've tried many, many sources. Elo, the Rabbi Yehuda, Halach el Chasakim Hirila. Talach l'Moshe Misinai. We're looking to figure out L'maisa. Minimum height of the sukkah, says Rabbi Yehuda. What are you bothering for? It's Halacha l'Moshe Misinai. Messiah. Period. How do I know? Shiurin, which is what we just spoke about. No, excuse me, Shiurin, which I'll speak about in a moment. Chatzitzin, the din of chatzitza, that you can't have anything blocking between you and the mikvah, between the utensil and the mikvah. Umechitzin, which is what we just spoke about, the minimum height is 10 tfachim. Halacha leMoshe miSinai. Period. Before we go further, so we basically have two diametrically opposed, not opposed, well, I don't oppose, different mahalchim how to answer the minimum height of a sukkah. According to Rabbi Meir, an amma 6 tfachim, aron v'kapayres. Aron v'kapayres, that we can get involved either with the binyanav or the word pinei, that the kapayres is a tefach, or we can get involved, it's a third of the height, like the Beis HaMikdash, gevaldik. According to Rabbi Yehuda, though, nothing starts. Where do we know it all from? Halacha.
So now that we know halacha l'Moshe Misinai according to Yehuda, we're not saying that according to Rabbi Meir,
so l'chayra, the answer to that kasha is halacha l'Moshe Misinai, you have to have a Messiah for. And l'chayra, Meir didn't have such a Messiah. That's why he felt he had to learn it from the Torah. L'chayra. Says the Gemara. So we just said there are 3 things, which we're going to see are many dinim included. Many halachas of shiur, and what is a shiur? You know, you have to make kiddush on a ravias, etc. We're going to see in a moment. The halachas of chatzitza, the halachas of mechitza, these 3 areas of halacha are learned from Moshe Misinai. So now we're going to take a left turn and dive into these 3 areas of halacha, which are halacha Moshe Misinai, a nice, small, isolated sugya. So anyone who felt that they didn't know what's going on, don't worry, it's a new sugya, an easy-ish sugya, just because it's completely random. So either you can say random is hard, because you have no clue what's going on. Random is easy, because everything is fresh. Let's see it together. Says the Gemara, 7 lines to the bottom, Shiurin, you're telling me that all the Shiurim are of Tov, Rabbi Rosenthal. You're telling me all the Shiurim are a halacha l'Moshe Misinai? Frak the Gemara, daraisa ninu dersev. Eretz chita sa'ira v'gefen uteina v'rimoin eretz is shamunu devash. Most notably, Zayin minim fame. What do we learn out from this pasuk? Rav Chanin kol ha'pasuk hazeh. This entire pasuk, all Shivas Aminim, L'Shiurin Nemar, are teaching us different shiurin. Now, I parenthetically pause and point out what the maskan of the Gemara is. What did the pasuk say? It just said the entity. It just said chita, se'ira, gefen. Did it say how much of each? No. So the Gemara now is going to say, oh, gefen is this amount, and chita is this amount, Rav Tov, Rav Soli. But this is obviously not really from the pasuk. It's more of an asmachta, v'chulu, as the Gemara is going to answer. But let's get there. Says the Gemara, 3 lines on the bottom. Hey, Amid Beis. Chita, wheat. Lebeis Aminuga. What is wheat? Erev Tov Rabbi Rosenthal Senior. What is wheat? Lebeis Aminuga walking into house of Saras. Titinan. Someone's walking into a Saras filled house. Please, no pictures. The Kalev al Ksefov. He's carrying his clothing on his shoulders. And his shoes and his ring are in his hands. So clearly he's not wearing the clothing if he's carrying it. Now, could be he's wearing other clothing. I don't know why our nostalgic picture has to be that the guy's walking around without clothing on. Maybe he's wearing different clothing. Who cares? The point is the clothing that he's holding. Who? Vehain, Tamein, Miyad. He and they are Tameh right away. Miyad, you walk into the house. Everything that you're holding is tummy. On the top of Hava Aleph Chevra. Hayalavush. Now you put on the clothing. You're wearing Caleb your clothing. Visadala Biraglov. And where do your sandals belong? On your feet. Vitabatov. Where does your ring belong? Obviously on your finger. Where else would your ring go? Okay, interessante Sache. Weiß nicht. Men and rings, we're not getting involved. Obviously, Bisman Gemara was a different story. Interesting how everything comes around one day or not. But yeah, let's not.
The king.
Many the ganze sugyas in Masechah Shabbos are all about men wearing rings, the kings, the signet rings. Thus, men clearly.
Speaking of kings, the king of England is sick.
Oy Baruch Hashem.
Cancer.
Oh, I feel so bad for him. He waited 60 years to finally.
75.
Is that typish?
All his friends are retiring. He's starting to retire.
His son is the one laughing now. He's like 35. What is he?
Son's the one that exposed him to radiation to get him sick. Weiter, let's go. Chevra, who to me ad vein toirin? They're tar ad. Here, this is the punchline. Chevra, every time you eat a challah roll, every time you make hamaitzi, if you're to want to know how much you have to bench, you always know it's something about kidei achilas pras, where it's Rosh Chodesh Adar. We're starting to have the Pesach vibes. I know we got an extra month over there. Okay, this means you got a second Purim. You are to have an extra Pesach vibes. You know you got to eat the matzah. Kidei achilas pras, 3 minutes, 6 minutes, 9 minutes. What in the world is kidei achilas pras? This is kidei achilas pras is what? Pas chitin. So the pasuk said chita, wheat. That's the kedei, the amount of time to eat a loaf of bread. Rashi says a chatzi, I have a loaf of bread. Chatzi kikar. Veloy pas iron and not barley bread. Meisav reclining v'olcha belifton. So sheer number 1 that we learn from the Torah, from the pasuk, is pas of chitin eretz chita, which is kedei achilas pras. Number 2, which is the amount of time to become tummy if what? You happen to be wearing your clothing. Excuse me, lifton is with relish, literally. Is that you eat the bread together with a dip. They Chazal, they didn't eat bread stam. Bread was always with a lifton, with a dip. Dips have come back in style. Dip could have been salt. Dip could have been anything. That's always. Oh, very good, very good. No, but the var was their challah needed it. Their challah needed it.
Did I eat a Shabbos meal by some English family? And they moitzi and they go to the soup. Right? What's going on?
Fish.
No soup, no fish, no dips.
Was we dug him? Was we dug him? Dug him.
It's another kasha.
I visit.
They were Jewish?
Seira, number 2 is barley. A bone. This is very negay, unfortunately, in Eretz Yisrael. In Melchama, you always want to know at what point does a bone mitame, could a kohen get involved? If there's a bone the size of a saira, a barley bean, mitame b'maga, if you touch it, b'massive, you lift it, if mitame b'oil. But if you're an oil, if you go on top of such a bone, it's not mitame. Kefen, very relevant every Shabbos. K'dei revi'as yayin, how much wine do you need for a kiddush? Revi'as l'nazir, that's, well, the root, the makar perfection is by a nazir, but of course we learned this into kiddush. Teina. A fig. Is the size of a dried fig, which is light sauce Shabbos, the amount that you're chayiv for carrying on Shabbos and Erev. Now, obviously, you're not allowed to even carry a mashu. This is the amount that you bring a carbon for. And public service announcement, I don't know what's going on. The world has gone crazy. Many areas that the world held for Pashit, there was never allowed to be an Erev. All of a sudden now, Hain Tikatog, the younger Chavra, they need to carry, Flatbush, everyone's busy carrying. I don't know what in the world's going on. Ramesha wrote Kama Vakama Chuvas. Whoever has such audacity to argue on Ramesha.
They made an Arab on the Lower East Side. That was always there. No, the Lower East Side is a very new thing.
It's not. It's all of his Ayon. Ramesha, you normal mention. Ramesha didn't mean it. The man wrote 50 pages of Chuvas. Flatbush, Hashem Yirachim. Hashem Yirachim. Parapars Chasidim.
Who is behind?
Some Yena, younger, ridiculous Rabbanim that have their. Let's go weiter. You never know what the Shirma are going to go. Let's go. Ramesha state he can't do it and finish. It's Ramesha. That's all I have to say. I have no comments. I'm not a Bardea. I just know what Ramesha says and weiter. Next. Rimayin a pomegranate. Titanan. As we learned in our Mishnah, called Kli Balabatim. Abalabatisha Keli. Shiuran Kirimainim. What does it mean that the shear is like a remain? What it means is if it breaks, if it gets a hole the size of a remain, it's considered a broken keli. In our world, this is nagea for something like you want to tovel it clean, you can't tovel it, you want to break it, because then you don't have to tovel it. Whole sugya has to be broken. It has to have a hole the size of a remain. Now we don't pascha, we pascha just has to be not usable. But in the world of Tumah V'Taira, has to be the hole the size of a remain. Next. No, ganze Zach. Eretz Zeitz Shemru Dvash, Eretz Shekol Shirek Zeitim. Says the Gemara, Eretz Keshekol Shirek Zeitim, all the Shirm are olives. Kol Shirek Zagadaitach. Hoyikani Damara. We just finished listing Shivas Aminim. How can you tell me all the Shirm are Zeitim? We just had this whole list. Elaima Sheroiv Shirek Zeitim. Givaldik Dvash. Honey. What type of honey? Date honey. Kikseves Hagasa, like a date. B'yom HaKippurim. So after this whole brisa, going through all of Shivas Aminim, what's the kasha? Alma, what do we see? Daraisa Ninu. We see that shiurim are a din daraisa. How did you, Reb Yehuda, suggest that shiurim are a halacha l'Moshe Misinai? Answers the Gemara, the obvious teretz. It is, bro. Do you really think what you just said? Shiurim, even the pasuk doesn't actually say the shiur. The pasuk just says the name, and then we learn it out. Elo what elchas inu. It's halacha l'Moshe Misinai. V'kra smachta ba'almahu. Period. Number 2, chatzitz, in the din of chatzitz, in the din when you take a utensil and you put it in a mikvah, can't have a sticker on it, can't have anything on it. Din when you take a woman, you dunk her in the mikvah, she can't have a sticker on her or a band-aid or anything else or stitches or whatnot. Chatzitzin, daraisa, ninu, or nail polish or makeup, all other good things. Chatzitzin daraisa ninu. Chatzitzin is a din daraisa. Dersev rachzas v'sara b'mayim. Shtei davar chatzitz beinoy lebein hamayim. So why are you telling me the din of chatzitz lach Moshe Misinai? It's a version of pasuk in the Torah. Answers the Gemara. Ki asoi hilchos are very important. You're right. There's a pasuk. And if I were to ask you, how do you know that you can't have a chatzitz as a pasuk? But what does Allah Moshe Misinai come to say? Lis ayroi, for the hair. Kiderabba, bar chana, dam rabba chana, 6 lines to the bottom of this we conclude. Nima achas, 1 hair. Kishura, if it's tied up, chaytzatzes, because the water can't get in the knot. Shalosh, 3 hairs that are tied up, ena chaytzatzes, because the water could get in. Shtayim, 2 hairs. Einai yodeya. That's halach l'mishra Sinai, which parenthetically is the reason why a woman has to be so careful to comb her hair before the mikvah. Because anyone who has girls know those are knots. Kipshutai. Oh, very good. That's what you have to comb to make sure it's perfectly smooth, to make sure there's nothing there. No, so that's the point that it comes to Einoi Makbid, Einachlam. You're right, but that's a need to catch. Let's get there. Let's just finish the Gemara. Frag the Gemara, Saira Nami Daraisininu. Frag the Gemara, what do you mean? The din of Star is also Daraisa. Tersev Rachzes B'Sara B'Mayim. S, that actual word S is Hatofel B'Sarai. Umayniu, what is auxiliary to your body? Sa'arai. Answers the Gemara, Ki asay hilchsa Rav Yitzchak, the famous Rav Yitzchak. We shall be zechat learn Hilchas Nida one day, and you'll learn Rav Yitzchak. Damar Rav Yitzchak, as we turn over to Vavam and Beis Chevra, and with this we conclude, and we go to Meirav. Meirav, Divar Torah. You can't forget this line. Midaraisa, Rubai umakbid. If the majority of an item is covered with something, umakbid, and you care about it, then midaraisa t'chatzitza. V'sheinoi makbid. If you don't care about it, einoi chatzitz. V'gazru, they made a gezerah al rubai sheinoi makbid misham rubai hamakbid. And a second gezerah, or a simultaneous gezerah, Shaila and Lumdis, Val mi'utoi hamakbid, misham rubai hamakbid. Mir hamakbid, that's what we're always worried about, the little band-aid. Ask the Gemara of Eligzer Nami al mi'utoi she'enoi makbid, misham mi'utoi hamakbid, misham rubai she'enoi hamakbid, a goof gezerah, v'na neikav, negzar gezerah. We don't say this, we'll pick up from tomorrow, Vav and Beis Chavra. I will post a Chazarah. Please, let's try to pick up the Chazarah b'siyata